Good afternoon and good morning to our West Coast listeners. My name is Juan Thomas, and I have the honor of serving as chair of the ABA Civil Rights and Social Justice section. Welcome to this week's Chair Chat. I'm honored to have as my guest today, Rebecca Hershey, who is the Senior Vice President of the Human Rights Campaign for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging. And today we're discussing critical issues impacting the LGBTQ plus community. Rebecca, welcome. Glad to have you.
Thank you so much, Juan. It's great to be here.
Wonderful. So Rebecca, let's just kick it off by asking you a very simple kind of open-ended question. What is the history and the work of the Human Rights Campaign?
Sure. So for many of us out there in the world, we recognize the Human Rights Campaign as the blue bumper sticker with the yellow equal sign.
Yep.
But we do more than make bumper stickers. HRC was founded 43 years ago in 1980 to advocate for full equality for LGBTQ plus people. And, full stop. That's the mission. I think we realize there has been a huge amount of progress, especially with sexual orientation and acceptance, and in some areas of legal protection. But the reality is that our most marginalized people are still suffering from violence, discrimination, fear. And so our mission continues to ensure all LGBTQ plus people, and particularly those who are trans and people of color and HIV positive, and economically disadvantaged, are treated as full and equal citizens everywhere. We do that through advocacy at the state and national levels. We do it through some litigation, and we also have a foundation that has programs that impact people's daily lives.
Well, I was intrigued by your job title when I was looking at your background.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you, I've done a lot of work in the DE&I space.
Sure.
But your title includes another word, belonging. And I'm curious if you could explain to us, what is the difference between inclusion and belonging?
Well, we could spend a year in a seminar series talking about that, but I think, in general, right, diversity is just a fact, right, of difference.
Right.
Inclusion is we invite people who are less represented into the circle. And that's not all inclusion is. Inclusion really is not only do we have to invite people into the circle, we have to then shape the circle around people who are in it. We can't force everyone, right, to become what already is. Then we're not changing, we're not growing, we're not accepting each other. It's just basic tolerance, and we want more than that. And so belonging is really like a result, an impact of when we are truly inclusive, invite a diversity of views, identities, backgrounds, experiences into the circle, and then reshape the circle so that we move forward together. People feel like they have a voice, they have respect, they feel responsible for themselves and each other. Belonging really implicates care. We are caring for each other in different ways in the movement and in the workplace.
So the analogy that I often use in this conversation, I always say inclusion is when you invite me to the party. Would belonging be what I would say, you let me sometimes pick the music?
Yes, I love that. Yeah, that's it.
All
right. Sometimes we pick the music. Sometimes we start at 9 a.m. Sometimes we start at 5 p.m. Right. We're willing to open up and not just say, come in and look like me, sound like me in order to be.
Okay.
Yeah.
That helps. Thank you for sharing
of
that.
course.
That's a great perspective. As you well know, next month is Pride Month, June.
Mm-hmm.
And are there, I know the answer to this question, but could you highlight, not are there, but what would you highlight as 2 or 3 of the critical issues that are facing the LGBTQ plus community in this season that we're living in?
Sure. And what a season it is. So, you know, in states across the country, we're tracking more than 500 anti-LGBTQ plus bills
Yes.
and state legislatures. And more than 200 of those are targeting the trans and non-binary community. So we think that, you know, depending on where we live, depending on who we see every day in our circles, you know, we see a lot of progress. But the reality is in municipalities and in states across the country, we still face a lot of those pain and fear-based targeting, right? So HRC has been pushing back with our coalition partners locally. About 90% of those bills have been stopped, but we're still working on that. The state legislative season in general ends at, you know, sort of comes to a close at the end of May. And, you know, with Pride Month in, you know, June, the official Pride Month in June, we want to make sure folks have at the forefront of their minds the joy and celebration that we have that comes with Pride, and to know that there are political actions, there are survival actions we can take. We have got to continue to protect each other and keep each other safe in local communities. I think the second big issue for me and for us is that it's critical that we see the cross sections of LGBTQ plus justice with racial justice, economic justice, climate justice, reproductive justice, gun safety, right? And in order to build power across our movements and show that we're a critical mass, because we're facing targeting, mongering from a lot of, you know, perpetrators. And we have so much that we can do to work with each other and recognize that our freedoms are really intertwined and show that critical mass.
I'm glad you raised the term intersectionality.
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of follow up on that concept. Last month, we saw what happened in Tennessee, with the two legislators who look like me being voted out of the legislature. But then we saw in Montana a trans legislator who was silenced. I saw a national kind of outrage about what happened in Tennessee. My observation, tell me if you think I'm wrong, I did not see that same level of intensity or outrage about what happened in Montana. Did you speak to that? Or is that your observation as well? Or did I maybe?
You know, I think a little bit of my daily experience is that I'm in an HRC bubble. So I appreciate your perspective on that. I mean, I do think that in large part, sexual orientation is better understood in this country now. And we still have a long way to go with gender identity, right? Which I think speaks to some of those issues, right? How we respond to marriage equality, for example, on the whole. And then, you know, how we respond to transgender and non-binary and gender non-conforming folks. The reality is when you, and I'm so grateful to Kimberly Crenshaw for giving us this term intersectionality. And I think it is used a lot, right? But I think one of the biggest things we have to understand about each other is that when we have multiple identities, and we all do, we don't experience life as one day and another day and another minute. We are always all of our identities. And so we really can't achieve LGBTQ plus equality while people of color continue to face discrimination because of race, or while trans and non-binary people are threatened and attacked because of gender identity, or while we're running our planet into the ground, right? These are things that we must preserve, you know, for each other. And I do think that we have a lot of kind of broader education to do. And what we understand is that there are a lot of people in our various communities who know a trans person, right? Or know a non-binary person, or know someone who's questioning that or struggling with it.
Mhm.
And I think making those personal connections, right, rather than looking at it as a great big issue, is
Right,
kind of move forward through
right,
that.
right. And given the on-out assault
Mm,
on education that
yes,
we're seeing in states all around the country, I was part of a discussion a few weeks ago about perhaps we should ban, or not ban, but protest and not go to Florida.
right,
And one of the people around the table said, "Well, we may have to stop going to half the country if we take
right,
that approach, right? Because it's not just Florida."
right.
What is HRC's response or strategy in response to these bills like Don't Say Gay bill and bills of that nature, and
Absolutely.
banning books? Yes, I think the personal relationship is critical, but from a policy perspective, maybe
Mhm.
even a strategic political conversation, what should we be doing in response?
Well, I think the way you're drawing the connection between Don't Say Gay bills and banning books is one critical thing we need to be doing more of. And we saw a lot of that in Florida with with the reaction. There are so many ways to 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 deconstruct this issue, but the reality is these are attacks on the systems we've established to create equity, right? The systems that we're trying to believe in to give us the voice, the vote, the decision
Right,
making, the power, And so, yeah, I grew up in the NAACP. I grew up boycotting South Carolina, right?
right,
And
right,
I literally grew up doing that and did it from an age where I didn't exactly question it, like I understood it, but I didn't exactly question it. And
right,
it really was not until that was a very powerful tool. And when we came together for our NAACP convention, the folks from South Carolina would, they were suffering because they
right,
felt
right,
people were boycotting. I think one of the really strong reactions we can have is to be realistic about what it means to be in these states, to try and provide protection, and come through with, if you're local there, going to your school board, your state house,
right,
um, starting with your cookout. Because the real politics and policy that impacts us every day is local. And I think that's so key. When they banned, Florida banned letter from a Birmingham jail, I can't even tell you, what
right,
I'm saying? Like I don't even have a framework for understanding why you would do that in 2020. But to say that, anyone who is for more ignorance is against what I believe in.
right,
Right. But that doesn't mean that the people that we have, the Black and brown people, the LGBTQ plus people, the Latinx people, the Asian American, Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander people, those folks are in Florida too, and in Tennessee and in Idaho, right? And we need to make sure that we are connecting and recognizing, the support that we can provide for them as well.
Well, that makes me curious. Does HRC have state chapters, or do you partner with state organizations to do work on the state level?
So we have local steering committees.
Okay,
And then we also have organizers and an organizing structure that works locally in coalition with
okay,
the kind of state, local.
right,
So a lot of the national or other national organizations you may know and love, they also have boots on the ground like we do. We have volunteers who take to the street and do door knocking
nice.
and, believe in what we stand for.
Mhm.
And they are critical because they do remind us that it's not just people in Washington, D.C. or New York
Right,
City or LA, right, or Chicago
right,
who really believe in that equality.
right, right. This year, our section has been focused on raising the economic justice issues in
Mm.
the context of the broader civil rights conversation. Um, One of my favorite quotes that I learned from the Urban League about a few years ago was, a civil rights agenda without an economic agenda is like trying to clap with one hand.
Yes.
And so we had an economic justice summit actually in March at Georgetown in DC, where we raised these questions around a variety of issues: voting rights, the environment, housing. Could you speak to some of the specific economic issues that are relevant or impactful in the LGBTQ plus community?
Definitely. So first, I think there's an assumption sometimes that the queer community is financially well off or well established and well educated. But it just doesn't hold true when we think about the full community. So we are as diverse as other communities, period. But also, the most marginalized people in our communities face systemic economic challenges, of the types that you would recognize, but because of or as a result of characteristics that they can't change, their own identity. So one example could be a trans or gender nonconforming person who doesn't have a supportive network, or a young LGBTQ plus person whose family cuts ties with them, at an age where they can't really do for themselves, can face, more obstacles, discrimination that makes them isolated from their own community and more vulnerable to disconnection from opportunity. So that includes school, work, housing, or their faith community, and really has them in that isolated position. And as you know from that economic justice summit, I'm sure, right, you can't be an island without any resources or any safety net of any kind and really thrive.
Right. What I've discovered in these conversations with my LGBTQ plus allies and friends is that when we talk about race, we talk often about having been rejected by the community or by a certain segment of the community. Within this community, it's often rejection by your family,
right?
Your loved ones,
right?
It's very personal.
It can be, absolutely.
It can be.
Yeah, and there are many and growing amazing families, right, who stand up for their loved ones, who stand with, us, who love and appreciate, the people they've raised or been raised with. But yes, I think it is very hard to come back from that kind of rejection, that kind of family rejection, just because of who you are.
Could you speak to that from a cultural context? I will tell you full disclosure. I come from a family that we're in the Chicago area, but we're from Mississippi originally. And we grew up in a very traditional Black Baptist church environment. A lot of my African-American friends come from that same cultural background.
Absolutely.
My friends in the Latino community talk about their Catholic upbringing, having very conservative family, traditional values. Could you speak to these issues from a cultural perspective, and how might people of color who have suffered discrimination, oppression, perhaps how we ought to look at these issues, particularly with respect to members of our family?
Absolutely. I think first and foremost is your own personal safety, right? So we always recommend that folks, do what they feel is right for themselves, safety wise. But when you're in a safe place, a safe zone, and can take a look at those perspectives, I mean, we have a lot of resources at HRC that talk about coming out, when you're BIPOC, having the conversations with your family. We have some faith-based resources. I find that the conversations come back to kind of your circles of influence. So again, the reality that we are able to open our hearts to people we know, to start the conversation. Sometimes it can't be the person who's coming out. Sometimes it has to be a love, an aunt, right? An uncle, a cousin. And there is a reality that we have a lot of traditions, right, in our cultures and our families. And at the end of the day, we try to choose love. We try to choose joy as much as possible. But in recognition of that, we have a fantastic program at HRC for parents of trans children. It's incredibly racially diverse and gender diverse. We have an HBCU program that alums of HBCUs can get involved in, and that really supports the leadership of HBCU LGBTQ plus identified students. We have some very comprehensive programs focused on racial equity and really making racial equity the cornerstone of what we do, so that we make sure not to leave out our Black and Brown communities, our faith strong communities, into the understanding that regardless of some of the teaching, some of the scripture, some of the upbringing and assumptions you may have, right? Love is at the core of everything that we do. And you can continue to perpetuate that love while you're working through your interpersonal, growth and support of your family member.
It is so important that you shared those type of resources, because I don't know if many people are aware of those support systems that are out there. In fact, I'm a graduate of an HBCU. I did not realize there was a network for HBCU students outside of their particular institution. So I definitely want to learn more about that, because I know these are ongoing conversations, especially in communities of color. I see this in my own circles of influence, that there's an ongoing and needed education in those spaces. So thank you for sharing that. And speaking of those resources, how can people find these resources? Are they on your website? What is your website?
Yes. Google HRC, you will find all the pieces of our website. Yes, we're at hrc.org. And there are the resources that I mentioned. We also have, some guidance on steps to take to become more inclusive of LGBTQ plus people in your workplace. We have kind of a recap of proposed and pending legislation and legal action. We have some really amazing programs for BIPOC and trans leadership development. So, and we even, have a little bit of a sponsorship opportunity for small businesses in your community that are supporting LGBTQ plus and trans-led efforts. So there's lots and lots of resources at hrc.org.
You have used the term twice during our chat today that I would like you to define.
Okay.
Did you say BIPOC?
I did say BIPOC. So BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. Okay. And it is not meant to erase any one person's identity, but to bring us together again to really strengthen the power that we have politically and culturally. Okay.
Thank you for defining that.
Of course.
I'm sure people are wondering what is BIPOC? Something I've heard that before. And what would you advise lawyers to do, specifically lawyers who are members of the American Bar Association, members of our section? What do you see as the role of lawyers, and how can we support the work of the Human Rights Campaign?
Well, I appreciate you asking that question. I think, again, starting within your circles of influence. So if you're on a committee, right, investigating the way that your committee is inclusive, or what actions, as you're planning for the year, what strategies you're going to focus on. Examine your law firms or your company's LGBTQ plus policies, their DEI efforts and their impact. We have a workplace equality program that can provide you with a lot of resources. And we also run the Corporate Equality Index. So check out, your vendors, your corporate partners to see where they land on the Corporate Equality Index. Join us, right? Always. You can always be a member of HRC, and, literally go to your school board, your state house, make sure the voting regulations and the various ways that our voting rights are being attacked are seen, right? And be vocal about them, because again, anything that is intended to shape a system to close it down is frankly un-American, at least in philosophy. And as lawyers, I think we're in a great place because we are constantly looking at the system, right? We are constantly strategically thinking about how the dominoes are going to fall from one little movement. So you have the ability to interpret that for your community in a way that your neighbors may not.
Right. Rebecca, thank you for your time. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your contribution to our profession and to our society. I want to thank all of you for listening this afternoon, and please share this video with your colleagues and friends. Rebecca, thank you for your time.